Appreciate everybody joining today. We want to give you guys a good understanding of one of the biggest features that is coming down the pike for us for our MDR service. It's something that we have really focused on as far as the next step and how the service is going to evolve. And just to give you a bit of background, we've always done response. It's been an important part of the service. And it's something that we've always leveraged other tools for. And that's worked pretty well in most cases, but we want to take it a step further. And the reason for that is we see attacks becoming a lot quicker, a lot more impactful, and people have fewer resources to respond to those. I think that's something that everybody's familiar with. When it gets down to the actual performance of a response, oftentimes there's a lag time, and that's just the human element. It's unavoidable. And we see that on our side and on customer side. So we want to come up with something that is going to address that as cleanly and as surgically as possible. And just to give you a little bit of background, I mean, there were a lot of ways we could have gone about this. And when we were looking at developing this, we did look at some other tools, and we eventually arrived on the notion of developing it ourselves based on our own Shield Vision platform. And if you're familiar with that, and I would assume most of the people on the call are, that is something that's already doing a lot of the heavy lifting of all this threat and alert aggregation, if you will. So it made a lot of sense to use that framework to then build something that is response oriented. And I think you guys are going to get a really good understanding of how that looks. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat throughout, and we'll make sure those get answered. All right. So let's get into it here. A lot of people are really familiar with SOAR. I think it's a really interesting product, or at least a market out in the security landscape right now. Everybody seems to understand the need for it. It's quite a digestible concept, right? You have an alert that comes in, and then you have a response that's generated from that. And one thing that I have learned over the past few years, interacting with customers and just studying the market in general, is that there's a lot of apprehension about SOAR, actually. A lot of customers want to bring it on, and then the actual logistics of doing so is very complicated. A lot of people will look at SOAR tools and kind of be blown away by the feature set, and really what that translates to is a lot of investment of time and personnel and people and trial and error to make the whole thing work. And that's not to say that a lot of the SOAR tools out there are bad products, because they're not. We reviewed many of them during this process, and I think they're excellent tools. The problem is a lot of customers don't have the bandwidth to fully manage them. So that's where threat response kind of came into the fore. That's where we decided, there's a place for a very surgical, super focused threat response component to an MDR service. And that was the genesis of it. We wanted to design it for a team that didn't have enough time in the day. And that was really the core design ethos, if you will. Everybody here on the call understands that security teams are burdened with tons and tons of responsibilities, so many things during the week, during the day. The last thing you want to do probably is to design out another integration to make something respond automatically. So what we hope with this being a managed part of our service is that it is able to free up time for our customers. It's able to give them the resources back, in essence, to focus on the complex issues. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. So here's the rationale. Why do this in the first place? And what are the values? So we think that this is going to have really no implementation footprint. This is all on our side. It's hosted by us. It is really a part of Shield Vision. It is fully baked into that fabric. So you guys don't have to install anything. You don't have to set anything up. We will handle all of the integrations. And some of you guys have seen a little bit of this through the early adopter program that we have. We're excited about that. We're working through it with customers directly. But it's a good snapshot into how this works. Basically, we would come to you and say, hey, we're ready to onboard you with threat response if that's something that you choose to do. And then from there, we'll map out those integrations that you want completed, and then we'll build them ourselves. If we don't have an out-of-the-box integration that's already completed, we'll build it from the ground up, and that's why we have the R&D team to support that. Another value, obviously, is that this is part of the service. We're not charging existing customers extra for this, and we are fitting it into future engagements, in a sensible way. So the whole idea here is that we firmly believe in this as part of our service going forward, and we don't want to branch it out into too many other different directions. This is in the fabric of our MDR service, and it's just going to be assumed that everyone is going to be able to benefit from it and really interact with it as if they were wanting another threat detection. So to kind of give you guys some context, most customers leverage our ability to design out and build custom use cases. We don't see this as any different. We want people to be able to get custom responses in the same fashion. They would just request that from the SOC, we'll build it out, and then it's an easy enclosed task, and then a repeatable process for the future. So very straightforward from a operational and logistics perspective. You guys aren't having to go in and build a bunch of integrations yourselves. That we're shouldering the burden there. We want to make this as accessible as possible. We realize, and this is maybe tying into that earlier SOAR conversation, there's also a lot of apprehension about SOAR in that a lot of organizations don't necessarily want to always commit to pushing the button right away. That launch the missiles, push the big red button. That's scary for a lot of people, especially when there's confidence that needs to be built. So we have designed this in a way, and we're going to show this in a short while, in a way that's very accessible and is easy to build confidence with. And we have some methods that will allow an analyst to look at it before the response is completed. And coming soon, we'll have a way for you, the customer, to actually look at it and then, basically commit to the response yourself. So we want people to gain confidence with it, to, kind of get over that apprehension of taking responses automatically, which, that's a big leap for a lot of people, but I think that's the direction the industry's headed. You see a lot of these attacks coming very fast and furious and in the dark of night, and then you blink and it's kind of over and done with. So that's the speed at which we want to move. Really, like I said, built into Shield Vision is a core concept. We have a lot of great content that's in there for a lot of different tools. This bolts right onto that. So you'll see here shortly how the content that we've already developed is leveraged to then kick off the responses. And I think it's done in a very sensible, templated, easy to understand way. It's a very repeatable process. We don't think that this is going to be limited to just threat responses either. I think there's a lot of ways that we can extend this capability into interesting security problems that are hard to solve. Gathering information for other processes, interacting with asset management tools, even patch management, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of ways that as threat response grows and as the integrations grow, we can start to reduce some of this client workload that you guys have. A lot of customers or a lot of customer security personnel are burdened with multiple duties. I mean, you guys all understand that. That's nothing new in the industry. But the same people are oftentimes responsible for risk management, vulnerability management, tracking insider threats, those kinds of things. So what we hope in the end that threat response does is to alleviate that workload of having to interact with the service. And I know that sounds weird. Obviously, we want a high level of interaction with what we provide, and that's all often contributes to a healthy MDR service. But what I mean by kind of reducing the interaction is we don't want you guys having to go and follow up and validate the things that we send you as often. Again, maybe that sounds counterintuitive, but we want to send you something that is as complete as possible to where you don't have to go and do additional investigation on your side. Sometimes that's necessary. It will probably always be necessary for some situations, but we want to, complete that. And oftentimes we talk about the last mile, right? The last mile of any process is usually the hardest. Well, we like to shrink it into a quarter mile or, a few hundred feet, right? So that's the direction that we're going with this. All right, just to give people some ideas, some use cases to think about, and the gears oftentimes, as we describe this, turn pretty quickly for people, but it really speaks for itself. I mean, everybody has a different set of tools. Oftentimes they wish those tools worked better and actually leverage the capabilities that were in those tools to begin with. So I'll just run through a couple ideas, and I think that you'll connect the dots very quickly. Let's say you have some kind of NDR tool such as ExtraHop, and you want to leverage all the great heuristics and machine learning that's in ExtraHop, and you want to actually commit that to a response. Well, we can build an integration that, kicks off something in SentinelOne, for example. If you're a Chronicle customer, a lot of great asset telemetry and logs that you can ingest, and then again benefit from some of the machine learning and the heuristics and the anomaly detection in that. Take that information and do something with it. Take it to Defender for Endpoint and be really proactive. Chronicle's got some great ways of looking at the prevalence of certain activities that that's kind of a unique process to Chronicle, and they have done that very well. And if you see anomalous stuff, there's no reason, if you're really wanting to commit to an active response, to just take action and then figure that situation out later. You can err on the side of caution with this. Same with digital shadows. There's a lot of great information that's pulled from digital shadows. Potentially leaked assets, account compromises, spoof domains. Oftentimes the outflow of those findings is a lot of manual work, and we want to shorten that process and alleviate that workload. So just an example, you have a VIP or a sensitive account that may look like it's compromised. Why not automate that and go directly to Office 365 and lock that account or reset the password, whatever the case may be. And then lastly, kind of the classic SIEM use case. You've got packet and log data being correlated together. Again, sometimes that is going to give you a better picture than just what the EDR tool will by itself. So you can kind of preempt some of the, or not have to wait for the endpoint tool to make that determination on its own when you have all this other data. So preempt that and just take the response on your own. And again, this is using the content that we have a lot of confidence in, and continues to expand and grow over time. We'll mention right now we have a lot of automated responses that go to you guys. We're going to continue to build that out. And one of the features that we're going to be adding actually within the next month is what we're calling back query. So that's going to actually go back and do exactly what it sounds like. It's going to take a query and then say, all right, I've got a certain type of information. From that, what's the investigation workflow from there? And it will step through that choreography and retrieve additional information and then put that in the automatic notification. So you're going to see a lot of things coming quicker that are already investigated. And again, this is trying to complete that process to where there's not as much validation required, and just makes the whole operation run that much quicker and smoother. Yeah, there's a lot of different use cases I could talk about. I think it might make sense at this point to hand it over to Elijah, and we can get directly into the demo.
Okay, so for any of you that have received a demo of Shield Vision before, this may look familiar. For those of you that haven't, this is Shield Vision, our internal hunting tool. Today, we're going to be talking specifically about a couple items in this configuration menu. For this first demo, I'm going to go ahead and show an instance of taking some data from NetWitness and utilizing it to block a service inside of SentinelOne. To just kind of show up front what we're going to be working with here, we have a couple demo things set up just to make this go off a little bit easier. We're going to be querying NetWitness to look for this specific .5.20 IP address. And if I go ahead and hop over into Sentinel here, SentinelOne, excuse me, you'll see that the device I have up here is that same .5.20 IP address, and it is currently connected, meaning it has not been quarantined. So ideally, by the end of this, without having to come back in here all too much, we will have a nice quarantine device taken off of the network. To get started, we really wanted to build something that was very quick to implement. We've all kind of seen the idea of playbooks in the past, and threat response is no different. This area is what we call response templates. That's just kind of our name for playbooks. For this demo, I'm going to be showing kind of creating a playbook up front and then implementing the last 10% on a customer itself to show how you might take something that is kind of pre-finished, customize it for the individualized use case, and then kind of deploy it to a customer's environment. So to get started here, go ahead and just give it a name, NetWitness to SentinelOne template, and we can go ahead and start adding nodes. We have this add node button here in the top right. When we click on that, it pulls up this lovely list of integrations that we have built out. Each of these are color-coded depending on what type of card they are. This is an area that is very rapidly growing. Right now, we do have support for things like Mimecast, Carbon Black, SentinelOne. We'll be seeing a little bit more of that Carbon Black one a little bit later, as well as Defender and Azure playbooks in here right now. We do have a couple more that are getting ready to come out in the future. And then to kind of get started, we're actually looking at these two trigger items here. In our case, what I showed a moment ago is a automated scan in our system. So I'm going to go ahead and select an automated scan trigger to indicate that we would like to consume data from that part of the application. And then it's going to ask us for some sort of meta key. In this case, looking at it beforehand, I know that the item we're pulling is the IP.source from NetWitness. So I'm going to go ahead and add that in and tell the flow here that we want to get started with that. We can go ahead and pop back into this add node area, and we're going to be looking for things from SentinelOne. In this case, we would like this SentinelOne quarantine item. It's going to go ahead and give us a nice little pop-up and ask us where we want to be getting that IP address from. Tell it the IP.source, whatever we're pulling in that case is what we want to take a response on. And at that point, it's as easy as connecting the two together. We'll show a little bit later on some of these other lovely cards in here, like the conditionals in our next demo. But for the time being, I'm going to go ahead and keep this one nice and simple. So for this is just kind of, very basic. We take an IP address, we block it in SentinelOne. I'm going to go ahead and save that, and we'll see that I now have a template populated over here. In order to actually get that applied to a client, say somebody reaches out to us and says, hey, I have these two services. I want to go ahead and block when we see this type of traffic. We already have some sort of content available on that. We can come in to the client. In this case, we have just our Datashield client with our demo environments, and we can assign a new automated response. And we're going to be, let's see, quarantine. Oh, I cannot spell today. That is quarantine in SentinelOne from NetWitness. And we get the option here for templates. So if we have something already that accomplishes that 90%, we can just come in here, quickly grab it, assign it to that scan that I showed earlier, and say, hey, anytime that this triggers and has an IP.source, we want to go ahead and fire this. We can go ahead and assign a template or an individualized response to every piece of content that we have built this way in your system. So if we want to, if you want to kind of customize based on the type of traffic you're seeing, that's totally doable. And this will look super familiar. This is what we just created. It has pulled the data in. It has pulled the data in and allowed us to start utilizing this for customization. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and double clicking. There we go. And I'm actually going to go ahead and add in one of our specialty cards. Dave talked about this here a moment ago, but something called analyst in the loop. What we've heard from a lot of clients about threat response and about SOAR as a whole is it sounds really fantastic, but there's a little bit of apprehension when it comes to kind of letting an entire automated system loose in your environment at first. And that's totally understandable. So we've built this idea of the analyst in the loop, which allows us to put it in line, and anything that comes after that card will be sent to an analyst for review before it takes any actions. If you wanted to, you could theoretically put a couple cards on the left-hand side, a couple cards on the right-hand side, really build this out however you want. And at any point that it comes across one of these, it'll go ahead, save everything that's in progress, drop it off to one of our analysts in a ticket, and have them review before it continues. So later on, we'll be showing how that might be used for possibly keeping one of your business critical boxes online. But for the time being, I'll go ahead and just kind of demo the environment here. We'll go ahead and hit save. And now this has been assigned to the client. If we hop back on over to the client here and scroll on down, we can see that I have quarantine in SentinelOne from NetWitness assigned to that SentinelOne demo scan from earlier. Go ahead and click through. In order for this to actually fire, I need to go ahead and turn this on. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here. We'll go ahead and enable that automated scan. And when I do that, it will automatically start kicking off scans based on the window that we have here. We'll give it just a moment to go ahead and run our system. You can see here that it's actually already finished, and it did pull one result count. If we click into here to see the results, we can actually see that based on that analyst in the loop, the automated response's status currently is paused. If I go ahead and expand this out, it gives us some information about it. It tells us, hey, the IP.source that we're looking to consume here is that .5.20 IP address. Fantastic, we hit the right one. The response related to it is currently paused. We can see that in 2 different places here, just to make sure that it is clear. If we'd like, we can go ahead and click on this and get a nice little pop-up that shows us what actions we will be taking. This is an interface that we are slowly designing out more to make it more obvious which ones are pending and which ones have been taken. But for the time being, it does allow you to review the entire flow. And then last but not least, we have these lovely approve and deny buttons. Obviously, if an analyst looks over this, determines, hey, that's something that we've been told is business critical, we can go and hit deny, cancel that out, stop these actions from being taken. But in this case, we actually want to go ahead and approve it. And you can see here that it is now running. We'll give that just a moment to do what it needs to in the background. And from there, we should be hopefully good to go. Okay, let me go ahead and pop over here, and you can see that with the network status, it is now disconnected from the network. It has been quarantined in the system and has been taken offline by threat response. Yeah, fantastic. That's really it there. Let me make sure if I haven't yet that I disable this so that we're not continuing to try to isolate that one. We do have a response level whitelist set up, so we will try to avoid what we call double tapping as much as possible. If that was to trigger over and over again hitting that same IP address, our system will recognize that it's already taken actions against that IP address and will stop it from trying to do it over and over again. So yeah, with that, I will go ahead and hand it off to Caleb Waters, one of our R&D developers, to go ahead and show off the next demo.
Thanks, Elijah. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen here. So this should look familiar. As we were just on this page here, we can see the response that Elijah created here. For this example, we're actually going to do a slightly different set of services. So we're going to go from Google Chronicle to Carbon Black. But before we hop into that, I just want to show this component off really quick. In addition to that analyst in the loop flow, allowing our analysts to intercept, potentially an action being taken on a business critical device, we can add that item to this client level whitelist. So in this case, if we were to add a particular IP address, right, I'm just going to give it an arbitrary value for the sake of this demo, right? And in this case, it could be, John Smith's laptop. In this case, no automated response or playbook would take an action on this particular IP address. So that way we wouldn't have concerns about that, as we're taking down our own servers and things of that nature. And then I'm going to hop into Chronicle quickly to just show you the set of rules that we have here. And as you can see, the host name that we're going to be looking for in this alert is WinDevTests CB, short for Carbon Black. Give me one moment while I try to move this bar that is currently blocking my tabs here. I'm just going to minimize this, pull this down. All right. Awesome. So then here we have Carbon Black's interface currently pulled up to that exact device. As you can see, the WinDevTest CB. And we can look right now that the button for quarantining this asset is currently available, so it has yet to be quarantined. And the goal of this playbook will be to demonstrate how we can quarantine based on a Carbon Black alert. So we're going to hop back into the Shield Vision interface. And for this one, I'm not going to go the template route. While that is a fantastic feature that allows us to really quickly create a number of responses that we can assign to clients, there's also the option to create it without a template. So for this, it's going to be Google Chronicle, Carbon Black, and we're going to select no template. And for this one, it's a little bit different in our system. Rather than it being an automated scan, it's what we call an integration service. So we're going to select Google Chronicle there. And it's taken us to a very similar page to the templates page, but in this case, it's actually already configured for the client once we save this. So for the last example, we showed a automated scan trigger for this one because it's an integration service in our system. We're going to show off the integration service trigger here, and the meta keys are slightly different as it's a different service. So for this one, we're going to be looking for an IP address again, assets IP. And then for this demo, we're going to show off another card here that is a conditional card. So there's a lot of fields here that allow us to do some more granular evaluation before we make particular execution. So we're going to look at this assets IP. And for this example, we're just going to put an arbitrary value that we expect will evaluate to false. So I'm just going to put Datashield protect, since that's not an IP, it will never be equal to that as we execute this. And then it'll have a list of cards that we can execute. So we're going to go ahead and connect these two cards together. And then we're going to add the cards that we'd like to execute in both cases. So for this one, we're going to be carbon black quarantine. We're going to be queuing on that assets IP again. So we'll connect that to one of the branches from this conditional card here. And then for this second example, we're going to do analyst in the loop again, mostly just to demonstrate the functionality of the conditional card. And that will point to a playbook that doesn't really, it won't actually execute a particular action. It's more of just a way to bail out of this particular playbook example. So I'm just going to give another arbitrary value here. All right, and then it's just a matter of piping these together. Putting back in here. So for this example, if it evaluates to true, which will be impossible in this case, as the IP will never equal this value. If it evaluates to false, we're going to have it execute this carbon black quarantine functionality. Now, I want to emphasize in this scenario, right, we're using a Google Chronicle to a carbon black quarantine instance. We have several services that do functionally equivalent behavior as far as blocking or quarantining a particular IP. Carbon black is an example of that. We also have Defender as of right now. We just saw an example with SentinelOne. So from here, we're going to go back to this client's page. And for this integration service, we have a slightly different UI for viewing the results rather than being a scan result, as it is not an automated scan. For this one, it's actually going to show up in a slightly different place. So there's some work going on in the back end right now. And so we expect that this will repopulate with that shortly. Just taking a quick moment here. Fantastic. All right. Now we have this automated response result. So this is the result based on our playbook. And based on this interface right here, we can already see a little bit of information about how this was executed, right? If that conditional evaluated to true, we would see right here that it would be paused because that's the status that we display for things that have triggered that analyst in the loop. So if we go, it's a slightly different UI, but it gives us a lot more information about the specific threat response result as opposed to scan results, which was the previous UI. So we can see here that it says complete. It shows us that our trigger was Google Chronicle. If we hop inside of this UI, this one has a little bit better indications of what was executed, what wasn't. So we can see here that this is highlighted in green as that is the card from the flow that we did execute. And there's not much data as far as the other cards displaying because they did not execute in this case. And then we also have some other UI features that help our analysts more quickly, analyze these results. So for this one, I'm going to hop back into Carbon Black. We're going to refresh this interface. here. So you can see in this case now, it's displaying as unquarantined asset. So it's clear that this asset has been quarantined as a result of that response execution. And in this case, we didn't have an analyst in the loop flow. So it just, when that conditional evaluated a false, immediately executed the quarantine step. So for this demo, that sort of concludes this Carbon Black versus this Google Chronicle to Carbon Black integration. So with that, I'm going to pass it back up to Elijah, Mike, Dave to handle more of the Q&A portion.